Florence refused to believe the moon goddess had chosen that cruel, vile man to be her mate. That could not be fate. Not for her. In front of the entire court, she did the unthinkable. She demanded the right to the challenge, choosing death over a life bound to him. Until, at the most brutal moment of the fight, the Alpha King rose to his feet and shocked the kingdom by declaring,
Stop!
"Stop. I will fight for her." The sacred flame burned blue. Florence felt her stomach twist at the exact moment the entire great hall held its breath. It was not fear. Not yet. It was that strange tension that came every year, when the court adorned itself like a bride, and the people packed into the galleries to witness the miracle. Except Florence already knew that miracle was far too beautiful a word for what happened there. The hall was full. Elders occupied their stone seats like living statues, with eyes that seemed to see straight through people. Nobles wore their finest garments, fabrics Florence would never touch, colors that only those of noble blood could wear without being accused of arrogance. The royal guard formed an impeccable line around the altar, and high above, in the upper galleries, the authorized spectators elbowed for space, because this ceremony had always been more than tradition. It was hope. The flame danced atop the ancient altar, licking the air as if it had a will of its own, and then spat out the first slip of parchment. A name. The herald picked up the scroll with exaggerated reverence, unrolled it slowly, pure theater, and announced in a voice that echoed off the stone walls, Lady Mirabelle of House Thornfield, and Lord Edmund of House Greymore. The hall erupted in polite applause. Florence watched the couple rise, their hands meeting in the center of the aisle as if it were choreographed. Smiles, bows, everything so perfectly arranged it almost hurt with how false it felt. Noble with noble. Always. She pressed her fingers into her worn skirt, feeling the rough fabric beneath her nails. Beside her, her father held a rigid posture, shoulders tense as if bracing for a fight that had not yet begun. On the other side, her older brother, Owen, stared at the flame with an expression Florence knew well. Suspicion mixed with contained anger. More names followed, more nobles, more theater. Then the flame spat out a different slip of parchment. The herald picked it up, read it in silence, and hesitated. Florence saw it. Everyone did. When he finally spoke, his voice came out louder, firmer, as if he were trying to convince himself that it was real. His Majesty, Alpha King Aaron, and Lady Evelyn of House Ashford. Silence held for half a second. Then the hall exploded into euphoria. Shouts, applause, nobles rising from their chairs as if the moon goddess herself had descended from the heavens to bless them personally. Florence saw Evelyn, tall, delicate, with blonde hair that looked like it was made of light, stand slowly, hands crossed over her chest in a practiced gesture of humility. But her smile was small, almost forced. The one truly smiling was her mother. Josephine sat in the front row among the nobles, and her smile did not fit on her face. It was not joy. It was victory, pure, raw, satisfied. She looked at the king, who remained standing beside the throne, expressionless, and then at her daughter, and Florence felt a chill crawl up her spine. That was not the goddess's choice. She did not know how she knew, but she knew. The flame flared again, restless, and spat out another slip. Florence felt her entire body lock up before the herald even opened his mouth. Florence, daughter of Gareth, and Theron of the South Village. Her name echoed through the hall like a sentence, and Theron's like a condemnation. The murmur came fast, whispers, stares. Florence felt every pair of eyes stick to her as if she were a bloodstain on the floor. Not because she was special, but because Theron was known. Not for being poor, for being cruel. He stood on the other side of the hall near the guard's entrance, and when he turned to look at her, Florence felt the air leave her lungs. Theron was big. Broad shoulders, thick arms, a face marked by scars he wore like trophies. Older. Much older. And the way he smiled, slow, confident, as if she already belonged to him, made Florence's stomach churn with disgust. She knew the stories. Everyone did. Theron mistreated others. He beat those who owed him and those who did not. He mocked the weak, laughed at fear. And now the moon goddess, or whoever was controlling that cursed flame, had chosen him for her. No. The word exploded inside Florence's head with such force that she almost thought she had said it out loud. Her father squeezed her arm, discreet but firm. A silent warning. Do not react here. Florence bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. The ceremony went on. More names, more couples. But Florence heard nothing anymore. The world blurred into distant voices and trembling lights. All she could feel was the weight of Theron's gaze, fixed on her like an invisible chain. When the flame finally went out and the herald declared the ritual complete, the crowd began to disperse. Nobles congratulated one another, laughing, celebrating. The people in the galleries descended in silence, because there was little for them to celebrate. Poor with poor, noble with noble, and the king with a carefully chosen noblewoman. Florence turned to leave, but before she could take 2 steps, Theron was there. He said nothing, just stood in front of her, blocking her path, wearing that crooked smile that made her stomach twist. "See you soon," he said, his voice slow, heavy with intent. Florence did not answer. She did not trust her own voice. Owen stepped forward, placing himself between them, and Theron laughed, a deep, mocking sound, before walking away. When he vanished into the crowd, Florence finally managed to breathe, but it was not relief. It was rage. Their house stood in the lower part of the city, far from the palace walls, far from paved streets and wrought iron lanterns. There, houses were made of old wood and cracked stone, and the smell of smoke and sweat clung to the air like a second skin. Florence entered and went straight to the corner of the main room, away from the hearth, away from her father's and brother's eyes. She needed space. She needed to think. Think about what? There is no choice. The name was drawn. That is it. But it was not. It could not be. Florence. Her father's voice was low, careful, as if he were trying to soothe a wounded animal. She did not look at him. "No," she said, the word hard, cutting. "Listen. No." Owen moved closer, crouching in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "We can leave," he said urgently, "before he claims you. We take what we can, disappear from the kingdom, go north, to the free lands. No one will follow us." "They will," Florence replied, feeling her throat tighten. "You know they will." "Then we fight." "Against whom, Owen? Against the guard? Against the law? Against the moon goddess?" She spat the name with bitterness, and then something inside her snapped. Florence stood up fast and turned to face them. Her father and Owen stepped back half a pace, startled by the fury burning in her eyes. "Do you really think this was the moon goddess's choice?" She shot back, her voice trembling with contained rage. "Do you really?" Her father opened his mouth, but she did not let him speak. "It is obvious this is manipulated." Florence pointed toward the door, as if the court stood just beyond it. "Years and years of ceremony, and it is always the same. Noble with noble, poor with poor. Always. And now, how convenient, the king is paired with Lady Evelyn, precisely her, Josephine's daughter, the most ambitious woman at court. Florence." Her father tried, but his voice was weak. "And Theron?" She continued, fists clenched. "He should not even be in the ritual. He has been past the age for years. But of course he causes too much trouble for the court, bothers too many people, so what do? They throw a woman in front of him like a bone to a rabid dog." Silence fell heavy. Owen looked away, jaw tight. Their father ran a hand over his face, exhausted, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost defeated. "Even if you are right, what does that change, my daughter?" Florence felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "It changes that I will not accept it." "And what are you going to do?" Owen asked, and now there was desperation in his voice. "Run? They will hunt us to the ends of the kingdom." "Fight? Do you think the guard will allow it?" "I will challenge him." The words came out before Florence could think them through, and when they did, the air vanished from the room. Her father went pale. Owen froze. "The challenge," Florence repeated, steadier now. "It is the only legal way out, the only way to break the bond without becoming a fugitive." "You will die," Owen said bluntly, without softening it, and his voice cracked at the end. "Maybe," Florence replied, looking at him with a calm she did not feel. "But I would rather die than live with him." The sentence hung in the air like a blade. The challenge of combat. It was the only loophole within tradition, the only legal way to break a proclaimed mate bond. But almost no one asked for it. Almost no woman did. Not because women could not fight. They could, and some were stronger than men. But few had the chance to learn. Few women were accepted into the royal guard. Few received real training, real weapons, a real chance, and a poor woman like Florence was practically condemned before ever setting foot in the arena. Florence knew how to fight because Owen had taught her. Since childhood, hidden behind the house, he passed on everything he learned from the few training sessions he managed to watch. Strikes, dodges, how to distribute body weight, how to read an opponent's movement before it happened. But Theron was not just any opponent. The challenge was hand-to-hand, without wolf transformation. That was the rule. Human strength against human strength. That did not make it fair. Theron was bigger, heavier, more experienced. He had spent years fighting, hurting, dominating. And Florence? Florence had courage. It would have to be enough. Her father rose slowly, as if the weight of the world had doubled on his shoulders. He walked to Florence, placed his hands on her shoulders, and looked into her eyes. And she saw there not only fear, but something worse. Acceptance. Because he knew she was right. He knew there was no other choice that would allow Florence to remain herself. "Then you will need to speak to the king," he said, his voice breaking. "Only he can authorize it." Florence nodded. She knew. And the next morning, before fear could convince her otherwise, Florence went to the palace and requested an audience with the Alpha King. The palace was not built for people like Florence. She realized that the instant she crossed the main gates and felt the weight of every stone, every stained glass window, every guard standing like a living statue, that place breathed power. Not the kind that came from shouting or clenched fists, but the silent, ancient kind that clung to your skin and whispered, "You do not belong here." Florence curled her fingers against her worn skirt, feeling the rough fabric scrape her palm. The same skirt she wore every day. The same one that was perfectly fine for the lower part of the city. But here, surrounded by polished marble and embroidered carpets, it felt like an insult. "It does not matter. You did not come here to fit in." She had come to request an audience with the Alpha King, and to her surprise, the request was granted. The guard who escorted her through the corridors did not say a word. He simply walked ahead, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence, and Florence followed, trying not to look too closely at the portraits on the walls. Kings and queens dead for centuries, with painted eyes that seemed to track her. They passed enormous halls, carved stone staircases, windows so tall that sunlight poured in like golden blades cutting through the air. And with every step, Florence felt her stomach tighten more. What are you going to say when you are standing in front of him? She had rehearsed. All night, lying on a thin mattress and staring at a cracked ceiling, she had repeated the words in her head. Steady, direct, no shaking. "I came to request the challenge. It is my right under the old law." Simple. Except now, walking through corridors that seemed to drain the courage from anyone not born within these walls, the words felt too fragile. The guard stopped before a tall door of dark wood carved with wolves running in a circle, the mark of the royal bloodline. He knocked twice, waited, then pushed the door open slowly. "Enter," he said, stepping aside. Florence drew a deep breath and went in. The king's study was not the great hall. It was smaller, more intimate, but no less imposing. Bookshelves covered the walls, ancient maps lay unrolled across a wide oak table, and light streamed through the windows in pale beams that made the dust dance in the air. And at the center of it all, standing beside the table, was him, Aaron, the Alpha King. Florence had seen him at the ceremony, of course. Everyone had. But seeing him from a distance, surrounded by elders and nobles, was different from being here, only a few steps away, alone. He was tall, taller than she remembered. Broad-shouldered, upright, but without the stiff, performative rigidity the nobles wore like armor. He was dressed simply for a king, a dark linen shirt, leather trousers, no crown, no cloak. He did not need them. The power was in his eyes, and those eyes were fixed on her. Aaron said nothing for a long moment. He only looked at her, and Florence felt as if he were reading every thought she tried to hide. "Do not lower your head. Do not step back." She kept her chin lifted. "Your Majesty," Florence said, and her voice came out steady. "Thank the heavens." Aaron inclined his head, a gesture so slight it was almost nothing. "Florence," he said, and her name and his voice sounded different, not condescending, not distant, just present. He motioned to the chair across from the table. "Sit." Florence hesitated. Sitting felt too intimate, but staying on her feet after he offered the chair felt disrespectful. She sat. Aaron came around the table and leaned against the edge, arms crossed. He did not sit. He stayed there, looking down at her, and Florence had to fight the urge to shrink in on herself. "You requested an audience," he began, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made every word sound like stone striking stone. "And I imagine I know why." Florence swallowed hard. "I came to request the challenge," she said, and this time her voice trembled, just a little. "It is my right. Under the old law." Aaron did not react. He did not look surprised or irritated. He only kept watching her with that intensity that made the air feel heavier. "It is," he said slowly. "It is your right." Silence. Then he leaned forward, just slightly, and his eyes held hers. "But do you understand what you are asking for?" Florence felt her heart race. "I do." "Do you?" Aaron repeated, and something sharp edged into his voice now. "You will fight Theron, hand to hand, no shifting. No weapons beyond what the arena permits. And he will not show you mercy just because you are smaller or younger or a woman. He will fight to win. And when he wins..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. Florence dug her fingers into the fabric of her skirt, nails biting in. "I know," she said, her voice low but steady. "I know I could die." Aaron went still, only watching. Then he stepped away from the table and crossed to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Florence saw the tight line of his shoulders, the way he took a deep breath before speaking again. "Why do you not run?" he asked without looking at her. "Your brother could take you. Your father, too. You could disappear before Theron claims you. Go to the Freelands. Start over. And spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder?" Florence shot back, too fast, and felt her anger return. Living on the run? Hiding? No. Aaron turned his head just enough to look at her from the corner of his eye. So you would rather die? It was not a question. Florence rose slowly and stared at his back. I would rather die than live with him. The words came out raw. No flourish, no drama. And Aaron felt as if something had tightened inside his chest. He turned fully to face her, and for the first time since Florence entered the study, he looked shaken. She would truly rather die. Aaron knew that kind of courage. He had seen it on battlefields, in wounded soldiers who refused to retreat, in old wolves who chose to fight to their last breath rather than surrender. But he had never seen it in someone requesting an audience at the palace, wearing a worn skirt, hands trembling with nerves. Who are you? The question echoed inside his head, and Aaron had no answer. He knew her name. He knew she was Gareth's daughter, an honest man who worked the forge, someone Aaron recognized because he had a good memory for faces and names. He knew she had a brother, Owen, who sometimes helped with the guards' training. He knew she lived in the lower part of the city and should never have drawn anyone's attention. Aaron rarely forgot a face, a name, a story. It was part of what made him a good king, knowing the kingdom, remembering people, even the ones who lived far from the palace walls. He had seen Gareth a few times, spoken briefly about orders for the guard, and filed those details away the way he filed everything. Precisely. Clearly. But knowing about Florence was not the same as knowing her. And here she was, shaking but steady. Smaller than him, weaker than Theron, with no formal training, no political protection, nothing, and still asking to fight. She is going to die. The thought came cold and unavoidable, and Aaron hated it. He hated that the law allowed it. He hated that Theron was the kind of man who ripped terror from others, the way a wolf tore flesh. He hated that Florence had to stand here asking permission to risk her own life, because the alternative was worse. And more than anything, he hated that some part of him, small, stubborn, irrational, wanted to protect her. Careful. He pushed the thought away. Sit, Aaron said again, but this time his voice came out softer. Florence hesitated, but obeyed. Aaron returned to the table, but did not sit. He stood, fingers tapping against the wood, thinking. If I authorize this, he began slowly, the court will turn it into a spectacle. You know that, do you not? Florence nodded. They will fill the arena. They will place bets. They will cheer for your death as if it were entertainment. I know. And if you lose... When I lose, Florence corrected, and there was something bitter in her voice. I know. I have heard the stories. Aaron frowned. What stories? Florence met his gaze, and there was pain in her eyes now. The last woman who challenged her mate, she said quietly. Years ago. She fought. She lost. And afterward, she killed herself. Because living with him was worse than dying. Silence dropped like lead. Aaron closed his eyes for a second, pinching the bridge of his nose. Cursed tradition. Cursed law. You still want to do this? He asked, and his voice sounded tired. Even knowing that? Florence did not hesitate. Yes. Aaron opened his eyes and looked at her. Truly looked. Saw the way she held her courage with both hands, as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. And he made a decision. I will authorize it, he said. Florence let out the breath she had been holding, her shoulders trembling with relief. Thank you, Your Majesty. But, Aaron continued, and his voice hardened now, heavier. You need to understand something. Theron will not go easy on you. He is bigger than you, stronger, older, more experienced. He has hurt too many people to count. And you... He stopped, eyes traveling over her from head to toe, not with disdain, but with something close to concern. "You can barely keep your shoulders straight in front of me," Aaron finished, brutally honest. "What makes you think you will stay on your feet against him?" Florence felt her throat tighten, but she did not look away. "My brother taught me to fight," she said. "Since I was a child. I know how to defend myself." "Knowing how to defend yourself is not the same as winning a fight in the arena," Aaron shot back. "Not against someone like him." "I know," Florence admitted, and her voice cracked, just a little. "But I am going to try anyway." Aaron was silent for a long moment. He stepped back, pulling away before the urge to do something stupid, like promise to protect her, like offer training, like anything, could take hold. "I will authorize the challenge," he said, firm now, returning to a king's tone. "The fight will take place in 7 days, enough time for you to prepare, and for the kingdom to prepare as well." Florence nodded, rising. "Thank you, Your Majesty." She bowed, awkward but sincere, and turned to go. "Florence." She stopped, looking back over her shoulder. Aaron held her gaze. "Do not die," he said, his voice low, almost like an order. Florence blinked, confused, but something in her chest tightened. "I will try," she promised. Then she left. When the door closed, Aaron remained alone in his study, staring at the place where she had been sitting. And for the first time in years, he felt something that was not duty, not responsibility, not weight. It was worry. Damn it. The news spread through the kingdom like fire through dry straw. Florence, the she-wolf from the lower city, challenged thereon. The king authorized it. The fight will take place in 7 days. And just as Aaron had foreseen, the court turned it into a spectacle. Nobles who had never heard Florence's name suddenly spoke of her as if she were a figure from legend. Some bet she would last less than a minute. Others, crueler, bet on how much blood she would spill before Theron finished her. And at the center of it all, Theron walked through the city wearing that satisfied smile, as if victory were already guaranteed. Florence heard the whispers, felt the stares, and kept training. Owen took her to the field behind their house every morning before sunrise, and the two of them fought until her muscles screamed. He showed no mercy. He did not go easy. Because he knew Theron would not show mercy either. "Again," Owen would say, sweaty and breathless after throwing Florence to the ground for the 5th time. "Get up and come again." And Florence got up, every time, even when her legs shook, even when her whole body ached, even when the voice in her head screamed, "You are going to die. You are going to die. You are going to die." She got up, because quitting was not an option. The days passed far too quickly. And then the day of the challenge arrived. The arena was packed. Florence had never seen so many people gathered in one place. The stone stands were full. Nobles in raised seats with cushions and parasols, as if they were watching a stage play. The common folk crammed into the lower galleries, shouting, roaring, because this was too rare to miss. Royal guards formed a cordon around the arena, and at the center of it all, the sand lay clean, marked only by a circle of white chalk. Inside that circle, there was no way out, only victory or defeat. Florence entered through the eastern gate, and the roar of the crowd crashed over her like a wave. Shouts, boos, a few scattered claps, perhaps from people rooting for the impossible. She wore simple clothes, leather trousers, a fitted shirt, worn boots. No armor, no protection, just her. On the other side of the arena, Theron entered, and the crowd's roar doubled. He was enormous. Shoulders as broad as timber beams, thick arms, hands that looked made to crush. He smiled when he saw Florence, slow, confident, cruel. Florence felt her stomach twist, but she did not look away. "You chose this, now hold to it." The herald climbed onto the central platform and raised his hands, calling for silence. "By the right of the old law," he announced, his voice echoing. "Florence, daughter of Gareth, challenges the bond proclaimed by the sacred flame. The fight will be hand-to-hand without wolf transformation, until one combatant yields or is unable to continue." The crowd erupted again. Florence drew a deep breath and closed her eyes for a second. "Do not die. Try not to die." Then she opened them. Theron was already in the center of the arena, waiting. Florence walked toward him, each step heavy as lead. They stood face to face, and Theron leaned in, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "When I am done with you, you will beg me to claim you." Florence did not answer. She only clenched her fists. The herald raised his hand. "Ready yourselves." Florence set her stance, remembering everything Owen had taught her. Feet planted, weight balanced, eyes on the opponent. Breathe, focus, survive. The herald dropped his hand. "Begin." Theron lunged, and Florence felt time slow. He was fast, far too fast for his size. The first strike came high, straight for her face, and Florence slipped aside by a hair, feeling the rush of air from the blow. She backed up quickly, trying to create distance, but Theron did not allow it. He came in again, and this time he connected. His fist slammed into Florence's shoulder, and she felt the impact detonate through her entire body. She stumbled, dropped to her knees, and pain flared like fire. "Get up." She got up. Theron laughed. "You are pathetic." Florence wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and saw blood. "It does not matter. Get up. Keep going." She surged forward, aiming low, but Theron blocked easily and shoved her back with such force that she hit the arena fence. The crowd erupted in screams. Florence tasted iron, felt her ribs throb, felt fear rise into her throat. "You are going to die here." "No." "Yes." "Look at him. You do not have a chance." And it was there, with Theron charging again, with the crowd screaming, with her body screaming for her to stop, that everything froze. Aaron sat in the royal box beside the elders, and for the past minutes he had been trying to keep his expression neutral, trying not to react, trying to be only the king watching the law carried out. But when Theron struck Florence again, when she fell and rose with blood running from her lip, when he saw the way she trembled yet still returned to the fight, something inside him snapped. It was not logical, not rational. It was instinct, pure, visceral, unignorable. No. Aaron stood, and silence fell over the arena like a blade. Everyone looked at him. The elders, the nobles, the guard, the people. And Aaron stepped down from the royal box, slow, eyes locked on the arena. "Stop," he said, and his voice rang like thunder. Theron halted, confused, staring at the king. Florence was on her knees in the sand, panting, bleeding, and when she looked up and saw Aaron descending into the arena, she did not understand. What is he doing? Aaron stepped into the chalk circle, stopped between Florence and Theron, and turned to face her. Then he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I will fight for you." The shock hit instantly. The entire court lost its footing. The elders rose from their seats, outraged. The nobles whispered, horrified. The crowd went utterly silent, because the Alpha King was not supposed to intervene like that. And in the raised seats, Josephine and Evelyn looked at each other. The mother with lips pressed into a thin line of contained fury, eyes bright with indignation, and the daughter with an expression of confusion mixed with something that almost looked like humiliation. Because the king who was meant to claim her soon was stepping down into the arena to fight for someone else. And Florence, kneeling in the sand, stared at him wide-eyed, unable to form a single word. "Your Majesty," Theron began, his voice thick with restrained anger. "This is not—" "It is my right as Alpha King." Aaron cut in, his voice cold as ice. "By the same law that allows the challenge, I may fight on behalf of one who cannot win alone, and I choose to fight for her." He looked at Florence, and his eyes met hers. "Stand," Aaron said, softer now. Florence shook, but obeyed, and Aaron turned to Theron. "Now you fight me." Theron went pale, because fighting the Alpha King was not merely dangerous, it was suicide. But he could not refuse. Not without looking like a coward, not without losing everything. So he lunged, and the fight began. Except it was not a fight. It was domination. Aaron moved as if he had been born for it. Fast, precise, lethal. He caught Theron's first strike with ease, slipped the second, and answered with a punch to the stomach that folded the man in half. Theron tried to retaliate, but Aaron was superior, not only because he was stronger, but because he was the alpha, and every wolf in that arena could feel it. Aaron struck Theron in the face, then the ribs, then slammed him into the ground hard enough to kick up sand in a burst of dust. Theron tried to rise. Aaron planted a foot on his chest and shoved him back down. "Yield!" Aaron ordered, his voice low, dangerous. Theron spat blood but said nothing. Aaron pressed harder. "Yield!" And Theron finally broke. "I yield." Silence held for a heartbeat. Then the herald, trembling, announced, "Victory for the Alpha King." The crowd exploded, but Aaron did not hear it. He lifted his foot from Theron's chest, turned, and walked to Florence. She was standing, but barely, legs shaking, eyes wide with shock. "Are you all right?" Aaron asked softly, for her ears only. Florence blinked, still trying to process what had happened. I do not understand," she whispered. "Why did you—" Aaron had no answer, so he only held out his hand. "Come with me." Florence looked at his hand, then at his face, and then slowly placed her hand in his, and Aaron led her out of the arena. Florence could barely remember how she had left the arena. Everything was a blur of distant voices, echoing footsteps, and steady hands. His hands, holding her arm carefully, as he guided her through corridors that seemed to narrow with every step. The pain in her injuries throbbed with each breath. The shoulder where Theron had landed that hit burned like a live ember. Her split lip stung, but none of it mattered as much as the question hammering inside her head. Why did he do that? Aaron had stepped down from the royal box. He had entered the arena. He had fought for her. And now he was leading her into the palace, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They passed guards who bowed in silence, servants who lowered their eyes, torchlit corridors where shadows danced across stone walls. Florence could barely process where she was, until Aaron stopped in front of a door, opened it, and motioned for her to go in. "Here," he said, his voice still steady. But there was something different in it now, something softer. Florence hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was unlike anything she had ever seen. Not vast like the great hall, but spacious, with a canopied bed dressed in white linens, a tall window overlooking the inner gardens, a fireplace already lit and crackling softly. A small table held a pitcher of water and fruit, and a carved wooden screen stood in the corner. It looked like a place meant for someone important. Not her. "This is—" Florence started, but her voice failed. "Your quarters," Aaron finished, stepping in behind her and closing the door. Temporarily. Florence turned to face him, confused. "Your Majesty, I don't understand. Why?" "Because you're not safe out there," Aaron cut in, blunt. Theron lost, publicly, in front of the entire kingdom, and men like him don't take defeat with dignity. Florence's stomach tightened. "He'll come after me." "He'll try," Aaron corrected, and there was a dangerous chill in his voice now. "But he won't succeed. Not while you're here." Florence blinked, processing. You're protecting me? Erin held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away, as if the answer were too obvious to need saying. I'll have the healers sent for, he said, ignoring the question. They'll tend to your injuries. Your Majesty. Erin. Florence stopped, startled. Erin looked at her again, and this time there was something different in his eyes, something less distant. When we're alone, you can call me Erin. His name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate, but Florence only nodded, not knowing what to say. Erin walked to the door, but before leaving he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. Rest. Tomorrow I'll have proper clothes brought in. And then he was gone. Florence stood alone in the room, staring at the closed door, and only then did she let her legs shake. She sank onto the edge of the bed, hands trembling, her whole body aching, and for the first time since she had stepped into the arena, Florence let the tears fall. Not from pain, from relief. You're alive. You made it. But the question still echoed, relentless. Why did he do that? The healers came soon after, 2 older women with steady hands and the scent of herbs, who cleaned her wounds in silence, applied salves that burned like fire, and wrapped her shoulder with clean cloth. It'll hurt for a few days, one of them said, her voice neutral. But nothing's broken. You were lucky. Lucky. Florence almost laughed. Lucky would have been never being paired with Theron in the first place. But she thanked them, and the women left, leaving her alone again. Florence bathed, a luxury she rarely had at home, where water was scarce and heat non-existent. Here, the tub was polished stone, the hot water rose in steam, and there were scented soaps that made her skin tingle with cleanliness. She dressed in the simple clothing they'd left, a soft linen shift, far better than anything she had ever worn, and lay down on the bed. But sleep wouldn't come. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the crackle of the fire, feeling her body ache and her mind spin in circles. He fought for you. Why? The next morning, a maid brought new clothes, simple dresses but well made, in fabrics Florence could never have afforded. She chose the most discreet one, a long-sleeved dark blue dress, and pinned her hair into a loose bun. When she stepped out of the room, a guard stood outside. Lady Florence, he said, bowing slightly. Lady? Florence almost corrected him, but the word died in her throat. May I walk around the palace? She asked, hesitant. Of course. The king has ordered that you have freedom to go wherever you wish, but I will accompany you, for your safety. Florence nodded and began to walk. The palace by day was different. There was movement, servants carrying trays, guards changing shifts, nobles strolling through the inner gardens. And everyone looked at her, some with curiosity, others with barely disguised disdain. Florence kept her head high and kept walking, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her like shadows. That was when she saw Owen. He was near the main gates, speaking with one of the guards, and when he spotted Florence, his face lit with relief. Florence. She hurried to him, and Owen pulled her into a tight hug, careful of her injuries but firm enough to make her feel how worried he'd been. Are you all right? He asked, pulling back to look her over from head to toe. Are you really all right? I am, Florence promised, and it was true. Sore, but alive. Owen let out the breath he'd been holding, and then their father appeared behind him. Gareth's eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept all night, and when he saw Florence, he pulled her into a long, silent embrace. Thank the goddess, he murmured, his voice breaking. Thank the goddess. Florence felt her throat tighten, but held herself together. The king sent word that you'd be staying here, Owen said, still holding her arm. He said it's for safety, that Theron might try something. He's right, Florence admitted quietly. Theron won't forget what happened. Gareth squeezed her shoulder, careful around the bandage. "Then you stay here as long as you need," he said firmly. "And if the king is protecting you, then I trust him." Florence nodded, but something strange was growing inside her chest. Trust him. She barely knew him, but he had fought for her. He had gotten her out of the arena. He had given her a room, protection, safety. Why? The days in the palace dragged on with an uncomfortable strangeness. Florence had no role there. She wasn't noble. She wasn't a servant. She wasn't anything. She was simply there, and it made her restless. But it also made her observant. During the day, she avoided the main corridors. She learned quickly that nobles had sharp tongues and little discretion. They spoke as if she were invisible, or worse, as if they wanted her to hear. A common she-wolf living in the palace. Absurd. The king is protecting her? Why? She's nobody. Josephine is furious, and rightly so. Evelyn is the chosen one, not this nobody. Florence pretended not to hear, kept her head up, shoulders back, and kept walking. But inside, the words stuck. After that, Florence began avoiding the corridors during the day. She stayed in her room, watching through the window, reading the few books one of the servants had brought when she asked. But at night, when the palace grew quiet and the torches burned low, Florence went out. She explored. She discovered she liked the library, an enormous hall with shelves that climbed to the ceiling, wooden ladders that creaked softly, and the smell of old paper that soothed her in a strange way. No one went there at night. It was hers. Florence spent hours reading about the kingdom, the ancient bloodlines, the legends of wolves and the moon goddess. She learned things she would never have had access to outside these walls, and it made her feel less useless. One night, she was sitting on the floor, surrounded by books on ancient rituals, when she heard footsteps. Florence froze. Who would come here at this hour? She turned slowly, and her heart lurched when she saw who it was. Aaron. He paused at the entrance to the library, clearly surprised to find her there. "Florence," he said, and his voice sounded different, less formal. Almost intimate. "Your Majesty," she replied, jumping to her feet and bowing slightly, her cheeks burning. Aaron frowned. "I thought you'd be asleep." Florence gave a small, awkward smile. "I could say the same." Aaron made a low sound, almost a laugh, and stepped into the library, closing the door behind him. Florence felt the air grow heavier. I like coming here at night," she explained, nervous. "During the day, I hear things I'd rather not hear." Aaron stopped, and his expression turned serious. "What kind of things?" Florence hesitated, then decided to be honest. "The nobles. They talk as if I'm not there, or as if they want me to hear." She looked away. "So I prefer to stay away during the day." Aaron's jaw tightened, and Florence saw anger flash through his eyes. "If anyone disrespects you, you tell me," he said, firm. "And I'll handle it." Florence blinked, surprised. "Your Majesty, you don't have to." "Aaron," he corrected. "And yes, I do. You're under my protection. That means no one mistreats you." Florence felt something squeeze in her chest, but only nodded. Silence settled between them, and then Aaron looked at the books scattered around her. "What are you reading?" Florence followed his gaze. "About the rituals, the ceremony." She hesitated. "I was trying to understand how it all works." Aaron went quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised them both. "I've been trying to understand as well." Florence lifted her eyes, confused. "What?" Aaron exhaled, running a hand through his hair. A gesture Florence was starting to recognize as frustration. "May I sit?" Florence blinked, startled, but motioned to the space beside her. Of course. Aaron sat on the floor without ceremony, and for the first time Florence saw him outside the role of king. Just a tired man. I've been investigating, he said softly. The ceremony. How mates are chosen. Florence's heart quickened. Why? Aaron looked at her, and there was something heavy in his gaze. Because something is wrong, and then he told her. About the legends that said true mates were rare. About ancient books that described the bond as something deep, inevitable, something that could take decades to happen. But over the past 20 years, Aaron said, his voice turning harder, every year there are at least 10 pairs proclaimed, sometimes 15. Florence felt a chill. It doesn't make sense, she murmured. Exactly, Aaron agreed. Silence fell between them, thick. Then Florence said carefully, I thought about that too, about the patterns. Aaron looked at her, attentive. Florence took a deep breath. Noble with noble, poor with poor. Always. And when a poor person is paired with someone, it's usually with someone convenient. She paused. Like Theron. Aaron clenched his fists. He's past the age for the ritual, Florence went on. Yet he was still chosen, for me, because he caused too many problems for the court. Damn it, Aaron muttered. Florence hesitated, then said, And you were paired with Lady Evelyn, Josephine's daughter. She said it to the books, not to him. Aaron was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said at last. I was. The silence stretched. I need to find proof, Aaron said finally. But books are missing. Records about sorcery, about magic tied to the moon goddess. He glanced at the shelves. Someone doesn't want me finding answers. Florence looked at him, seeing the weight on his shoulders. I can help, she offered, before she could stop herself. Aaron stared at her, surprised. Why? Because, Florence said, firm. If the ceremony was manipulated, then Theron was never supposed to be my mate. And I need to know the truth. Aaron went still, studying her. Then he nodded. Tomorrow night, then. Florence agreed. And when she left the library that night, something had changed. She was not alone anymore. The next night, Aaron arrived at the library carrying old court maps and lists of influential nobles. I thought we could start here, he said, unrolling one of the maps on the table. Identify who has access to the altar, who takes part in preparing the ceremony. Florence leaned in, studying the names. Josephine is here, she pointed. She sits on the council that oversees the rituals, Aaron confirmed, bitterness in his voice. Along with other nobles from ancient lines. They spent hours comparing lists, marking names, searching for connections, and in the middle of it, they talked. Small things at first. Aaron asked about her life in the lower city, and Florence told him about Owen teaching her to fight, about her father working the forge until his hands were calloused. It sounds free, Aaron said, and there was something almost melancholy in his voice. Free? Florence let out a humorless laugh. Most days we barely had enough to eat. But you chose, Aaron countered. How to spend your day, who to be with, what to do. He looked at her. I never had that. Florence fell quiet, seeing the loneliness in his eyes. It must be hard, she said softly. Being king. Aaron gave a half smile, sad. Hard is a kind word. And for the first time, Florence saw beyond the crown. She saw a man carrying everyone's weight. On the third night, Florence reached the library before Aaron. She had spent the day thinking about their conversation, the things he had said, and one thought would not leave her. When Aaron came in, she already had a book open. I found something. she said without preamble. Aaron stepped closer, and Florence pointed to the page. It's about true mates, about how the bond manifests. She read aloud. When soulmates meet, there is a recognition that transcends reason, a pull that cannot be ignored. As if something inside you knows, before the mind can even understand, that this person is yours. Florence paused, feeling the weight of the words. Aaron went very still beside her. If the bond is that specific, Florence continued, closing the book, how can there be so many pairs every year? There can't, Aaron said quietly, unless someone is forcing it. Silence. Then Aaron said something that made Florence's heart slam. I've read those same texts about how true mates feel. The certainty, the immediate connection. He stopped with his back to her. And then I wonder if the sacred flame truly chooses based on that. He didn't finish, but Florence understood. Because you don't feel that with Evelyn. The silence stretched, heavy. Florence forced her voice to stay calm. Maybe the bond takes time. Maybe it isn't always immediate. Aaron turned and looked at her with an intensity that stole the air from the room. Or maybe the sacred flame is wrong, he said. You're manipulated, Florence added quickly, returning to safer ground. Aaron nodded, and something in the air between them loosened. But Florence felt it, felt how close they had come to crossing a dangerous line. On the fourth night, the search grew more intense. Aaron brought records he'd obtained from the Royal Archives, documents detailing the ceremonies over the past 50 years. They sat on the floor, surrounded by stacks of paper, and began to compare. Look, Florence pointed. 50 years ago, there was a ceremony with no pairs proclaimed. And here, Aaron flipped pages quickly. 40 years ago, 3 ceremonies in a row. Nothing. Florence picked up another record. But 21 years ago, she stopped, reading carefully. There was a ceremony with no proclamations, and after that, never again. Aaron took the document from her hands, and Florence saw his expression change. 21 years ago was when my mother died, he said, his voice tight. Florence's stomach clenched. Aaron stood, went to another shelf, and returned with a book on the kingdom's recent history. In the year of the Queen's death, he read aloud, the ceremony of the sacred flame proclaimed no pairs, causing despair among the people, who interpreted the divine silence as an ill omen. He snapped the book shut. The kingdom was unstable. My father had just lost the queen. I was too young. The court was divided. And the people nearly revolted. Florence began to understand. And the following year, Aaron finished, bitter. The sacred flame, miraculously, began proclaiming pairs again. Many pairs. And it's continued that way ever since. Florence felt a chill. Someone used the people's desperation to justify the manipulation. And turned the ceremony into a tool of control, Aaron finished. He threw the book onto the table, and Florence saw fury in his eyes. 20 years, he said, his voice shaking with anger. 20 years of lies. Florence stood, stepping closer slowly. Aaron. He looked at her, and Florence saw not only anger, but something close to pain. How many people were forced to live with someone they didn't choose? He asked quietly. How many lives were destroyed because of it? Florence had no answer. So she simply stayed there, near him, offering the only thing she could. Presence. And Aaron seemed to understand. Because he took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was steadier. I'm going to find who did this, and I'm going to end it. We are, Florence corrected, firm. Aaron looked at her, gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, he said simply, and Florence felt something tighten in her chest. because she was starting to realize those nights had become more than a search for truth. They had become theirs. The next night, they returned to the library with renewed determination after discovering the connection to the Queen's death. Aaron brought more documents, and Florence organized their findings into separate stacks. Old records, lists of nobles, books on sorcery. They worked in silence, each absorbed in their own search, but Florence noticed how his presence had become comfortable, natural. She didn't have to think before she spoke anymore, didn't have to measure every word. With Aaron there in the library, far from the masks they both wore during the day, she could simply be. "Florence, come look at this," Aaron called from near a tall shelf at the back of the library. She stood and walked over to him, then looked up. Aaron pointed to a thick book on the highest shelf, almost brushing the ceiling. "There, that red volume. Looks like a record of old trials. It might have information on witches or spellcasters tried in the kingdom." Florence frowned, gauging the height. "It's too high." "There's a ladder," Aaron said, pulling the wooden ladder that slid along rails in front of the shelves. He positioned it, tested it to make sure it was steady, then looked at Florence. "Want me to get it?" Florence shook her head. "I can." She climbed slowly, feeling the old wood creak under her feet. Near the top, she stretched her arm, trying to reach the book. Her fingers brushed the spine, but she couldn't get a grip. "One more step," Aaron called from below, holding the ladder steady. Florence climbed one more rung, rose onto her toes, and finally managed to pull the book free. But the motion shifted other volumes beside it, and she felt her balance slip. "Careful," Aaron warned. Florence tried to steady herself, but the ladder wobbled, and she felt her body tip backward. Then strong hands caught her at the waist. Aaron had climbed up behind her, fast, and now he was 2 steps below, arms around her, steadying her. Florence gasped, clutching the book to her chest, and looked down, and met his eyes. Very close. Too close. Aaron's breathing was slightly uneven, and Florence felt the warmth of his hands through the thin fabric of her dress. He held her firmly, protective, but gentle. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Florence nodded, but couldn't speak, because she was mesmerized by the closeness. By the way his eyes looked even darker in the dim library light. By the way he looked at her, not like a king looking at a subject, but like a man looking at Florence, Aaron murmured, and her name came out rough. She felt his hands tighten slightly at her waist, as if he were fighting the urge to pull her closer. "Aaron," she whispered back. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world had shrunk to that tiny space on the ladder, the two of them breathing the same air, the inches between them. Florence saw his gaze drop to her lips, saw him lean in, just a little, and felt her heart slam. He's going to kiss me. But then Aaron blinked, as if waking from a trance, and pulled back. "Come down slowly," he said, his voice tight. "I've got you." Florence nodded, still dizzy, and began to climb down. Aaron descended with her, his hands never fully leaving her waist until both of them were standing on the floor. And even then, he was slow to let go. When he finally did, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry," he said without looking at her. "I shouldn't." "You saved me from falling," Florence cut in, her voice coming out steadier than she expected. "You don't need to apologize." Aaron finally looked at her, and something in his eyes made her stomach flip. Desire. Guilt. Conflict. "The book," he said, nodding at the volume Florence still held. "Let's see what's in it." Florence nodded, and they returned to the table. But as they read, Florence still felt the ghost of his hands on her waist. And when, by accident, their fingers brushed as they turned the same page, both of them froze. They looked at each other, and Florence saw the truth written on his face. He's fighting it as much as I am. Aaron withdrew his hand slowly, fixed his attention on the book, and kept reading as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and they both knew it. The next night, Florence arrived at the library and found Aaron already there. They worked in silence for a while, each absorbed in their own search. Florence sat at the table, flipping through an ancient volume on the kingdom's traditions, trying to find any mention of witches or sorcerers who might have served the court. Aaron combed through the shelves, pulling books down, checking them, putting them back. But Florence noticed. She noticed the way he glanced at her from the corner of his eye. She noticed how his attention wasn't fully on the books. And she noticed, with a tightness in her chest she tried to ignore, that she couldn't stop looking at him either. The way he moved, the tense line of his shoulders, the concentration on his face when he found something interesting. Stop it. But it was impossible. Especially after the night before. After feeling his hands at her waist. After being so close she could see the small scars on his face. After almost... Florence. She blinked, pulled out of her thoughts, and looked up. Aaron stood on the other side of the library holding a book, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "I found something you should see," he said. Florence nodded, dropping her gaze back to the book in front of her, pretending to read. She heard Aaron's footsteps approaching, and then he was behind her. Too close. Florence felt her whole body go taut when Aaron leaned in, reaching over her shoulder to set the book on the table. But he didn't step away right away. He stayed there. So close Florence could feel the heat radiating off him, could hear his breathing. Slow, controlled, but not entirely calm. His arm brushed her shoulder as he pointed to a page in the book. "Here," Aaron said, his voice lower, rougher than usual. "It talks about a trial. A witch accused of manipulating sacred rituals, 200 years ago." Florence tried to focus on the words, but all she could process was how close he was, the way his breath grazed the side of her neck, the way she could smell him, the way that if she turned her head just slightly, their faces would be inches apart. "Don't turn. Don't turn." "She was..." Florence began, but her voice came out unsteady. She cleared her throat. "She was sentenced?" "Exiled," Aaron answered, and Florence felt the word more than she heard it, because he was that close. But before that, she confessed she had taught the ritual to someone at court. Florence turned her head on instinct to look at him. Mistake. Because Aaron had turned too, and now they were face to face, inches apart. Aaron felt the air leave his lungs. Damn it. She was too close. Close enough that he could see the tiny golden flecks in her brown eyes. Close enough that he could smell her. So close that if he leaned in just a little... No. But he wanted to. Heavens, how he wanted to. He wanted to close that last sliver of distance. He wanted to find out if her lips were as soft as they looked. He wanted to pull her closer and forget everything. The court, Evelyn, the cursed traditions that bound him. If I could, I'd kiss her right now. Right here. And to hell with the rest. Florence saw his gaze drop to her mouth. Saw his jaw lock. Saw him swallow. And her heart raced. No. No, no, no. I can't fall for the king. The thought slammed through her head so hard it almost hurt. Stupid. Stupid to think he'd ever claim you. He's the king. You're nobody. He'll marry Evelyn and you'll have to watch and smile and pretend it doesn't hurt. Time seemed to freeze. Aaron leaned in. So slightly Florence wasn't sure if it was real or if she was imagining it. Then he pulled back. Slowly. Painfully slowly. He stepped away, taking a step back, and ran a hand over his face. Neither of them said a word, Florence stared down at the book on the table, pretending to read. But the words were blurred. Aaron returned to the shelves and grabbed another volume, but he wasn't really seeing it. And the silence between them brimmed with everything they couldn't say. Later that night, seated on the library floor surrounded by ancient books, they finally found what they had been looking for. A book hidden behind volumes on agriculture, so out of place it could only have been deliberately concealed. Florence pulled it out, and the cover was dark leather, untitled. She opened it slowly. The pages were handwritten in an elaborate ancient script. "It's about sorcery," she murmured. Aaron stepped closer, keeping a safe distance this time, and read over her shoulder. "Magic tied to the moon goddess," he finished. Florence turned the pages carefully, then stopped. "Here," she pointed. Aaron read aloud. "With the proper essence drawn from the full moon, and the ritual conducted by one versed in the ancient arts, even divine manifestations can be shaped according to the practitioner's will." Absolute silence. "Shaped," Florence repeated, a shiver running through her. Not followed. Shaped. Aaron took the book, flipping through more pages, and found drawings, intricate circles, strange symbols, detailed instructions on how to prepare the altar. "I've seen these symbols," he said, his voice tight, "on the ceremony altar." Florence looked at him and saw anger building in his eyes. "This is proof," she said softly. "It's the beginning," Aaron corrected. "Now I need to find out who's doing this. Who knows this ritual? Who has access to the altar?" He closed the book carefully and looked at Florence. And there was something different in his gaze now. Determination. "When I find out who did this," Aaron said, his voice low but steady, "I'm ending this farce. I'll expose the manipulation, and I'll cancel the claiming ceremony." Florence's heart jumped. "But what if you can't in time?" Aaron held her gaze, the intensity in his eyes stealing her breath. "Then I cancel it anyway." "Aaron, you can't." "I can." He cut her off. "And I will. I'm not claiming someone I didn't choose. I'm not living a lie just because the court expects it." He stepped closer, and Florence saw the king's mask fall away completely. "I've spent my entire life doing what was expected," Aaron went on, his voice dropping lower, growing more intense. "Following traditions, fulfilling duties, carrying everyone's weight. But this I won't do." Florence couldn't look away. "Even if it costs you?" she whispered. "Even if the court turns against you?" "Even then," Aaron promised. And Florence saw the truth in his eyes. He meant it, completely. "Then we have 8 days to find the proof," she said, firm. "Because it'll be easier if you have solid evidence." Aaron nodded. 8 days, he agreed. And they went back to the books. But now something in the air had changed. It wasn't just tension. It was a promise Aaron had made, not only to Florence, but to himself. The following days passed in a blur of books, documents, and discoveries that made Florence's stomach churn. They found everything. Records of payments made by Josephine to a spiritual advisor, Melisandre, the witch who lived on the outskirts of the kingdom and who, officially, had no ties to the court. Letters exchanged between nobles, discussing who should be paired with whom as if they were pieces on a board. And worst of all, an old diary belonging to a long-dead elder, confessing that he had allowed the manipulation for the good of the kingdom, when the people nearly revolted after the year with no proclamations. With every discovery, Aaron grew more tense, more furious, but also more determined. Florence helped him organize everything, assemble the evidence in a way no one could deny. She saw the king he truly was, strategic, ruthless when necessary, but also just. And with every night they spent together in that library, Florence felt the inevitable happening. She was falling in love with him, not with the king. With the man who ran a hand through his hair when he was frustrated, who smiled faintly when she made a sarcastic remark, who looked at her as if she were the only person in the world who truly understood him. Stupid. You are so stupid. But she couldn't stop. And worse, she knew he felt the same. She saw it in the lingering looks, in the way he found excuses to stay close, in how his voice changed when he said her name. But they both held back, because there was still one day left, one single day until the claiming ceremony, and then everything would change. On the afternoon of the 7th day, Aaron summoned the elders. Florence was not present, but Aaron had promised to tell her everything afterward. She waited in her room, trying to read, trying to distract herself, but anxiety consumed her. What if the elders don't believe him? What if they protect Josephine? What if Aaron is forced to claim Evelyn anyway? The hours dragged on. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink through the window, and Florence was nearly giving up on hearing any news that day when she heard it. Knocks at the door. Firm. Urgent. Florence stood, her heart racing, and opened it. Aaron was there. But he didn't look like the controlled, strategic king she knew. He looked euphoric. His eyes were bright, his breathing slightly fast, and there was a smile, small but real, on his face. "I did it," he said, his voice full of a raw emotion Florence had never heard before. She blinked, processing. "You did?" They accepted it. Aaron stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, and Florence realized too late how intimate that was. He had never entered her room before. "I showed them everything. Every piece of evidence. Every letter. Every damned record." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing as if he had too much energy to stand still. The elders were shocked. Some tried to deny it, but the evidence is undeniable. Josephine manipulated the ceremony. Melisandre conducted the spell, and 6 nobles were involved. Florence's legs went weak, and she braced herself on the edge of the bed. So tomorrow. Tomorrow I expose everything," Aaron said, stopping in front of her. "Publicly, in front of the entire kingdom, and I cancel Evelyn's claiming." Florence felt tears burn her eyes. "Aaron, I did it, Florence," he said, his voice cracking just slightly. "I'm ending this. I'm freeing everyone who was forced by this lie." He lowered himself to her eye level and cupped her face with both hands. Gentle, but firm. "And then," Aaron continued, his voice dropping, growing more intense, "I'm going to claim you." The air left Florence's lungs. "What?" "You," Aaron repeated, his gaze locking onto hers. "In front of everyone. In front of the entire kingdom. I'm going to claim you. Not because the sacred flame chose you. Not because tradition demands it. But because I want to." Tears spilled down Florence's cheeks. "Aaron, I'm not noble. I'm not anyone special. You are everything." He cut her off, the intensity in his voice silencing her. "You are brave. You are strong. You chose death over surrender. And you see me, not the king. Me." He rested his forehead against hers, and Florence felt his breath mingle with hers. "I can't take it anymore," Aaron confessed softly. "I can't be near you and not touch you. I can't look at you and pretend I feel nothing." "Aaron," Florence whispered, his name trembling on her lips. "Tell me you feel it too," he asked, vulnerability now in his voice. "Please, tell me it's not just me." Florence closed her eyes, tears streaming. "You know I do," she admitted at last. "You know." And then Aaron kissed her. His mouth met hers with an urgency that stole all the air from Florence's lungs. He pulled her closer, and she responded, her hand sliding into his hair, gripping, holding. The kiss was intense from the very first second. Aaron pressed her against him, one hand at the nape of her neck, the other at her waist, and Florence felt the entire world disappear. There was only him, his heat, his taste, the way he held her as if she were precious and necessary all at once. Aaron deepened the kiss, and Florence let out a soft moan, the sound swallowed by his mouth. He answered with a low, primal growl that made something inside her tighten deliciously. His hands slid along her back, pressing, exploring, and Florence arched into him, wanting more, needing more. Aaron guided her back gently until her back met the wall. He didn't stop kissing her. His mouth traveled to her neck, kissing, lightly biting, and Florence gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders. "Damn it, Florence," Aaron murmured against her skin, his voice hoarse, undone. "You have no idea what you do to me." "Show me," she replied without thinking, and felt his entire body go taut. Aaron returned to her mouth, kissing her with an intensity that left her dizzy. Then his hands moved to the buttons of her dress. Florence felt each one come undone, felt the fabric loosen, and her heart raced. This is happening. This is really happening. Aaron parted the fabric, baring her shoulders, and his mouth followed, kissing every inch of newly exposed skin. Florence pulled his shirt from his trousers, her hand sliding beneath the fabric, feeling warm skin, tense muscles. Aaron growled again, lifted her, and Florence wrapped her legs around his waist. He carried her to the bed, laying her down carefully, then covered her body with his. His weight was delicious, overwhelming and comforting at the same time. Aaron kissed her jawline, her neck, her collarbone, and Florence arched, pleading without words. "Aaron," she whispered, her voice broken with desire. He looked at her, his eyes dark, nearly black with want. "If we don't stop now," he began, his voice tight. "Don't stop," Florence replied. And Aaron almost gave in. Almost. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then, with visible effort, pulled away. Florence felt the loss of his warmth like a physical blow. "Why?" she asked, confused, hurt. Aaron sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands over his face, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I want to do this right." Florence sat up as well, pulling her dress back over her shoulders, looking at him without understanding. Aaron turned to her, and there was so much emotion in his eyes that Florence felt her chest tighten. "Tomorrow," he said firmly, "I will claim you before the entire kingdom. I will make you mine officially. And then," he reached out, touching her face gently, "then I will have you for real. The right way." Tears returned to Florence's eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "Sure this is what you want? I'm not—" "Don't finish that sentence," Aaron cut her off. "You are exactly what I want, and tomorrow everyone will know it." He stood, straightened his shirt, and walked to the door. But before leaving, he looked at her one last time. "Tomorrow, Florence," he promised, his voice low, filled with promise. "Tomorrow you will be mine. Truly." Then he left. Florence remained seated on the bed, her body still humming, her heart racing wildly. And for the first time, she let hope fully bloom. Tomorrow, the great hall was packed. Florence had never seen so many people gathered in one place, even more than on the day of the challenge. Nobles filled the elevated seats, dressed in their finest clothes, jewels glittering beneath the torchlight. The elders sat in their stone chairs, faces grave and attentive. And the people, allowed to witness the king's claiming ceremony, crowded the galleries, murmuring among themselves. Florence was hidden in one of the side corridors, far from the crowd's eyes but with a clear view of the throne. Aaron had asked her to stay there. "Trust me," he had said that morning, when he came to see her before the ceremony. Just trust me. And she did. Completely. The herald climbed onto the platform and raised his hands, calling for silence. We are gathered here to witness the claiming of His Majesty, Alpha King Aaron, he announced, his voice echoing off the stone walls. As proclaimed by the sacred flame, the king will claim his mate, Lady Evelyn of House Ashford. The crowd applauded politely. Florence saw Evelyn rise from her seat beside Josephine, her face pale, her shoulders tense. She did not look happy. She looked resigned. Aaron stood beside the throne, dressed in formal attire, a dark mantle over his shoulders, the crown finally upon his head. He looked every inch the king. But Florence saw the tension in his shoulders, saw how his fists were clenched. The herald gestured for Evelyn to step forward. She took one step. Then Aaron raised his hand. "Stop," he said, his voice echoing like thunder. The entire hall froze. Evelyn stopped, confused. Josephine rose from her chair, alarm flashing in her eyes. Aaron descended from the platform slowly and walked to the center of the hall. "Before any claiming takes place," he began, his voice calm but firm, "there is something the kingdom needs to know." Murmurs erupted. The elders exchanged looks, but did not interrupt him. They knew what was coming. Aaron gestured, and guards brought in a table laden with documents, books, letters, the evidence. "For weeks I have investigated the sacred flame ceremony," Aaron said, turning to face the crowd. "Because something did not add up. True mates are rare. The legends make this clear. Sometimes decades pass without a single proclamation." He picked up one of the ancient books and held it aloft. "Yet in the past 20 years, every year we have dozens of pairs proclaimed. Every year, nobles are paired with nobles, commoners with commoners, as if someone were choosing." The silence was absolute. "And someone was," Aaron continued, his voice hardening. 21 years ago, when my mother died and the kingdom faced instability, the ceremony proclaimed no pairs. The people saw this as a bad omen and nearly revolted." He lifted one of the letters. "Then, the following year, a group of nobles, led by Lady Josephine Ashford, hired a witch named Melisandre to manipulate the sacred flame." Cries broke out. Josephine went white. "This is absurd," she shouted. "Lies! How dare you?" "I dare because I have proof." Aaron cut her off coldly. "Letters exchanged between you and other nobles discussing who should be paired with whom. Records of payments made to Melisandre, and the diary of an elder confessing that he allowed the manipulation." He slammed the documents onto the table, the sound ringing like a sentence. "You turned a sacred tradition into a tool of control," Aaron said, his voice trembling with rage. "You forced people to live with those they did not choose. You destroyed lives, all for power." The crowd was in absolute shock. Florence saw Josephine attempt to flee, only for guards to block her path. Aaron turned to Evelyn, his expression softening. "Lady Evelyn," he said gently, "you were used by your mother. You bear no blame for this, and I will not claim you." Evelyn released the breath she had been holding, and Florence saw relief flood her face. "The proclamation between us was manipulated," Aaron continued, "and I revoke it. You are free." Evelyn bowed, trembling, and whispered, "Thank you, Your Majesty." Then Aaron turned back to the crowd. "The sacred flame ceremony is suspended until we learn how to restore it properly," he announced. "Without manipulation, without interference. And all pairs proclaimed in the past 20 years will have the choice to remain together, or to part." Murmurs erupted again, but Aaron raised his hand, calling for silence. "And as for me," he said, and Florence felt her heart race, "I will make my choice, not based on false magic, but on truth." He looked directly toward where Florence stood hidden, and extended his hand. "Florence," he called loudly. "Come here." The entire hall turned to look. Florence's legs trembled, but she walked. She stepped out of the corridor, crossed the hall beneath the gaze of hundreds, and when she reached Aaron, he took her hand and drew her to the center. "Before everyone," Aaron declared, his voice firm, holding her hand tightly. "Before the elders, before the entire kingdom, I claim Florence, daughter of Gareth, as my mate." The shock was immediate. Cries, whispers, outrage from some nobles. But Aaron did not stop. "Not because the sacred flame chose her," he continued, now looking only at Florence, "but because I choose her." He lifted her hand and kissed her fingers gently. "Florence," he said softly, "for her alone. Do you accept?" Tears streamed down Florence's face, and then she said, loud enough for all to hear, "Yes." The crowd erupted, but Florence heard nothing anymore. She only saw Aaron smiling, truly smiling, and pulling her into an embrace. The hours that followed were a blur. Josephine was arrested, along with the nobles who had aided in the manipulation. Melisandre was summoned to stand trial. The court descended into chaos as some nobles protested and others quietly accepted the new order. But Aaron didn't care. He had done what he promised, and now, finally, Florence was his. Officially, publicly, but not yet completely. Night fell over the palace, and the corridors grew silent. Florence was back in her room at least for now, trying to process everything that had happened. She was the king's chosen. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Florence rose, her heart racing because she knew who it was. She opened the door. Aaron stood there, but he wore no crown, no royal mantle, only a simple shirt and trousers. And he looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. "May I come in?" he asked softly. Florence stepped aside, and he entered, closing the door behind him. They stood facing each other, and the tension in the air was unmistakable. "I claimed you," Aaron said at last, "before everyone." "I know," Florence replied, her voice trembling. "But something is still missing," he continued, stepping closer. "Something that truly seals the bond." Florence felt her heart leap. "The marking," she whispered. Aaron nodded. "If you want it," he said, stopping in front of her. "If you'll allow me." Florence looked at him. At the man who had fought for her, who had chosen her, who had turned the kingdom upside down just to be with her, and said the only thing that made sense. "Yes." Aaron didn't wait another second. He pulled her close, his mouth claiming hers with urgency, and Florence surrendered completely. The kiss was intense, desperate, full of everything they had held back for days. Aaron's hands slid down her back, pulling, pressing, and Florence moaned into his mouth. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her to the bed. Aaron laid her down gently, but there was nothing gentle in the way he looked at her. It was pure desire, pure need. "Florence," he murmured, his voice rough, "if you want to stop at any point." "I won't." She cut him off, pulling him closer. "I want you. Now." And Aaron lost control. He kissed her with an intensity that stole all the air from her lungs, his hands working the buttons of her dress, removing it, casting it aside. Florence tugged at his shirt, and Aaron helped her, pulling it off in one swift motion. Then it was skin against skin, heat against heat. Aaron kissed every place he could reach, her neck, her shoulders, her collarbone. And Florence arched, begging for more. He answered, his hands exploring, teasing, until Florence was trembling with desire. "Aaron," she gasped, "please." "I know," he murmured against her skin. "I know." Then he made her his. Slow at first, careful, letting her adjust. But when Florence pulled him closer, asking for more, Aaron gave in. The rhythm grew faster, more intense, and Florence lost herself completely. There was only him, his weight, his heat, the way he held her as if she were precious and necessary all at once. "Florence," Aaron growled, his voice hoarse, broken. I need to mark you." "Yes," she gasped. Aaron gently turned her, baring her neck, and Florence felt his mouth descend to where her neck met her shoulder. He kissed there, tenderly, then asked one last time, "Are you sure?" "Completely," Florence answered. And Aaron bit. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to mark. And Florence felt it. Felt the bond forming, warm and inevitable, connecting them in a way no false ceremony ever could. Felt something inside her fall into place, as if a missing piece had finally been found. Aaron released her, gently licking the mark, and Florence trembled. "Mine," he murmured against her skin. "You are mine now." "Yours," Florence agreed, turning to face him. And she saw his mark on her too, not physical but there, in the way he looked at her, in the way he held her. They were one. At last. Aaron pulled her close, and they stayed like that, intertwined, breathing together, until the world slowly returned. "I love you," Aaron said suddenly, his voice low but certain. Florence felt tears burn her eyes. "I love you too," she replied. And it was true, completely, irrevocably true. Aaron kissed her gently this time, then drew her beneath the covers, holding her against his chest. "Tomorrow," he said drowsily, "we'll have to deal with the court, the trials, everything." "I know," Florence murmured. "But tonight," Aaron continued, kissing the top of her head, "you're only mine." Florence smiled against his chest. "I always was," and wrapped in the arms of the man who had fought for her, who had chosen her, who had turned the kingdom upside down just to love her. Florence finally slept in peace, because she was no longer the low-district wolf who belonged nowhere. She was the Alpha King's mate, by choice, by love. And that was worth more than any sacred flame could ever proclaim.